Did everybody get a recording notification? Was that a thumbs up, Jesse? I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Welcome in to everyone. We're going to take a couple minutes to let everyone join. Feel free to put your name and your pronouns and where you're coming from in the chat if you'd like to connect with others from your area. Introduce yourself. For folks just joining us, as I was saying, we are going to give it about another minute and a half before we get started. Thank you all for being here. Feel free to write your name and where you're coming from in the chat. Introduce yourself. All right, we have got a packed agenda for tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started so we can make sure we fit everything in. So once again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Good Yontif to those observing Yom Kippur today. I want to introduce myself. I'm Dan Friedman. I'm a state lobbying and advocacy associate for the Sierra Club, and I work with a bunch of states, including many in the PJM region. And I'm really excited to be here tonight to bring together all of these different states on this collaborative effort. So we're going to have presenters from Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Illinois, and Delaware. And we will be going through some of the different issues in each of these states as it relates to PJM. So for our table of contents, just a little overview of what we'll be covering tonight. We will recap PJM 101. We'll talk about just a brief refresher if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. What is PJM? Why is it important? Why is it important that we're aware of it as advocates? We'll go over some of our main concerns with PJM and how they've not always been the most helpful in terms of clean energy adoption and our electric bills. And we'll share some reactions and responses from the states that are here tonight. Then we'll have some state-by-state highlights. So you'll get a snapshot of what's going on in your state around PJM issues. How you can take action. We do have some petitions and action alerts for you to take or contacts to plug into the work more deeply in your state. And then we have some breakout rooms for a chance for a more open discussion and to connect with others in your state, since we do have so many people from all the different states here, and you'll have a moderator for your group as well. And then we'll have a chance for some Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and now pass it over to Dustin Thompson, who's our chapter director for Delaware, to give us an overview of PJM 101.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. And thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, this evening. Really appreciate everybody's interest in this really important topic. So just want to stress we're going to keep it really high level to try and get into the state-specific issues. So please do check out the PJM 101 webinar, which we will share the link a couple times throughout the evening tonight if you really want to get more in depth on what PJM is. So at a high level, PJM is our regional transmission operator. You can see the footprint of PJM in blue. So it's 13 states plus DC, and their main task is to coordinate the flow of electricity across the region. Go to the next slide. So when we talk about the grid, just to back up for a second, what we're really talking about is two sides of the same coin. So on one side, you have the transmission system. This is what is managed by PJM. On that side, you have energy generation and now emerging battery storage as well. So you have your gas plants, your wind, onshore and offshore, your large-scale solar, nuclear, et cetera, large generators. And those generators produce electricity that then has to move across the region. So it moves along the transmission system, which is made up of very large high voltage lines. So you see these large towers usually along like highways and major roadways. And those are moving power, electricity, from the energy generating source, right, the power plant or the battery storage across the region. Now, everything on that side of the system, on the transmission side, is federally regulated by an organization called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC. You'll hear me talk about FERC a couple times. And so the feds regulate that. PJM helps manage that, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But on the other side of the coin, you have the distribution system. These are the smaller poles and wires that you'll see outside your house, in your neighborhood, along your city streets. Those are managed by your local utility or cooperative. These are lower voltage lines, and they're regulated by the state in most cases. So that's what's bringing electricity from the transmission system through, substations to help manage the power, and then it gets to your house or business on the distribution system. Little caveat being that, of course, we also have solar on folks' homes, and that power flows back and forth normally on the distribution system. It's more complicated than that, and you can watch PJM 101 to learn a little bit more about that dynamic. Go ahead, move to the next slide. So who exactly is PJM and what exactly do they do? So PJM, again, is our regional transmission organization or operator. They are in charge of a number of things. They have three main charges. Number one, of course, is to keep costs low, keep the costs of energy down. They also manage resources that are trying to connect or disconnect from the grid and resources that are already connected to the grid. So power has to be matched on a minute by minute, second by second basis. And so they manage power plants ramping up or down to make sure that the grid stays safe and reliable and you don't have issues around brownouts or blackouts or overloading the transmission or distribution systems. They also run various energy markets as well. A lot of folks have heard a lot about the capacity market recently, or the capacity auction, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, and you can learn a lot more about in our PJM 101 webinar. But that's only one market that they run. They also run all the wholesale markets that utilities buy power off of to help supply you and your homes and your businesses and industries with electricity. So they're in charge of helping run, manage, regulate, and set up rules for all of these markets and auctions. So who are they? PJM essentially is broken down into two decision-making bodies. So you have the board, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but you also have members. Now, the members include things like utilities, planners, state advocates, like your public or consumer advocates, generators, so fossil fuel generators, solar generators, much less so, marketing firms, large energy users. There's really 5 main classifications or buckets that members fall into. And they do get to vote on different things, not everything, but they do have votes. And those votes are weighted depending on what bucket that membership is. And so there's some issues there as well that we go over in our 101. But the members can come up with proposals and send those up to the board. But ultimately, a lot of what PJM is decided by the board. And the board's independent of the members, but it is elected by the members. So the members vote on who's going to be on the board. And the board can make some changes without ever talking to their members, but all of those changes and decisions do have to go through FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission at the federal government. So the board has 9 members plus a CEO. 7 of the spots on the board are reserved for people with certain backgrounds, such as folks that have done utility management, folks that have run power plants in the past. So really, it's 7 of the spots are really kind of ingrained to represent essentially like the status quo of the power industry. Of note, there's no designated position for state advocates like consumer advocates or public advocates that are in charge of ratepayer protections for their states. They do not have a seat guaranteed on the board. There is also no environmental space on the board as well. In fact, the environment's not actually a consideration when it comes to the PJM board making decisions. That's not a factor that they consider. They really consider those 3 charges. PJM also has staff as well. So many folks in state government know that they'll have folks from PJM staff come to their state and effectively lobby around policies the state may or may not consider moving forward. And it's also important to note that PJM is, although they do set effectively policy for the region by controlling what power plants come online or offline and how that process is managed, they're not actually a government agency, so they're not subject to FOIA or open meeting requirements. And member votes are also often done behind closed doors as well, and often are lacking consideration around state policies because of that lack of inclusion on the board. So go ahead to the next slide. So the big issues that we're going to hear from about this evening, the common threads, as you will, governance and lack of transparency. I talked about how many decisions are done behind closed doors. PJM will say that they're very transparent because a lot of their meetings can be attended if you can figure out how to register with their system, which is pretty challenging. But they're often full day meetings, so not really accessible to most people. And even if you were to get in, they generally talk at a very, let's say, wonky level. And so it's hard for most folks to understand. And without state representation on the board, there's a lot of issues around governance, whether or not the PJM board is actually considering state policies when they're making decisions. Additionally, PJM as a region has been historically heavy industrialized area and focused primarily around large fossil fuel generation. And so that's what they're sort of used to. That's what their system's been designed around. And so there's a lot of precedence and there's a lot of favoritism towards dealing with those resources because that's how the system's been set up. Additionally, there's a big lack of long-term transmission planning. And so as power plants try to come online or offline, there's been a lack of that planning necessary to make sure that that power gets to where it needs to go. And that's led to some states like Delaware and Maryland having to pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year in your electric bill to keep old inefficient plants running until transmission can catch up because we're missing a lot of data and information needed and infrastructure needed to move those electrons around effectively. And then finally, there's been a lot of issues with the interconnection queue. A lot of folks have heard about this. PJM actually had to stop taking applications for a couple years to institute a number of reforms that FERC required of them because they had a 10-year backlog of power plants trying to come online. Under the old system, that's how long they predicted it would have taken. They've done a lot of reforms and they have cleared a lot of the queue, But unfortunately, again, because they're used to dealing with fossil fuels and how their systems operate, a lot of what has been pushed forward through the queue has been fossil fuel generation, despite the fact that over 90% of the queue is actually clean or renewable energy. And so there's still issues ongoing with the queue, even though those reforms have started to take place. Go to the next slide. But the good news is that collective action is becoming more and more commonplace. It really got started, and shout out to Pennsylvania and their governor for actually taking action against PJM at FERC, again, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the regulator at the federal level. PA noticed that the capacity auction was going to be a real sticker shock, a real hit to consumers. And so they actually did sue PJM at FERC or bring action against PJM at FERC. And that ended up settling to create a cap and a floor that has saved ratepayers hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars already over the last couple years capacity auctions. Building off of that, in July, governors from 9 states signed on to a letter to PJM expressing a lot of concerns around the governance and transparency issue, asking for more collaboration to help address these issues and help address the need for state policy to play a role and for states to be able to advocate on the board. They're actually asking for more representation on the board. And then there's also been advocate letters as well that many Sierra Club and other organizations signed on to help push PJM to get more involved in large load management, i.e. connecting data centers to the system, which they currently do not have a process to be a part of. And then actually just a few days ago, 105 state legislators from 10 different states signed yet another letter urging PJM to take additional actions to accelerate the deployment of clean energy projects. Because even though that queue's been starting to clear out, because it was so delayed, it led to a lot of issues in permitting and other processes related to those projects. And so you sort of solved one issue, but there still remain several others. So go ahead to the next slide. So those are the general themes, but each state feels this impact a little bit differently. And so I'm going to kick it back to Dan to bring us into a more state-by-state centric, again, conversation. Again, if you want to learn more about PJM and their role in electric prices and electric markets, please check out the PJM 101 webinar on YouTube. Dan?
Thank you so much, Dustin. We are going to now, as you mentioned, enter our state-by-state discussions. And we're going to start with Virginia, which, as many of you know, is the center of the data center boom, and so facing a lot of issues with PJM. I do want to just point out the maps here do show the PJM territory in every state. In some states, it covers your whole state, and others, it's just parts of your state, and you have got another RTO. So that's what the green areas cover. The darker green bubbles are going to be areas of concentrated load. So I'm going to now pass it over to Connor, our chapter director from Virginia.
Thanks, Stan, and good evening, everyone. What an awesome turnout. Thank you all for being here. My name is Connor Kish, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter. I've been director for about 2.5 years, and I've worked here at the Sierra Club for almost 6 years. And Virginia, as Dustin alluded to, is in the leadoff hit spot tonight because the energy demand here is arguably causing the rise in tension with PJM. Virginia is the data center capital of the world. There are more data centers here than anywhere in the world. And with more and more data centers proposed every day, the question has become, how will we meet the energy demand the data centers are proposing? And also, should we? This is just one of the tensions related to PJM in Virginia, and I'm going to touch on 3 total. First, I'm going to talk about the Virginia Clean Economy Act and its role in the massive build-out of wind, solar, and battery storage technologies. I'm going to talk about the rapid growth of in energy demand from data centers. And then I'm going to talk about the risk that a lack of PJM reform has on Virginia in particular. So first, I'm going to go back to 2020. During the legislative session in Virginia that year, the Democratic-controlled legislature passed and the Democratic governor signed what was known as the Virginia Clean Economy Act, or the VCEA for short. This was a sweeping and comprehensive bill and the most ambitious climate and clean energy legislation that was ever passed in the South. And it did so many things. It set retirement deadlines on polluting fossil fuel plants. It mandated growth in the solar and wind industry and in battery storage, required investments in energy efficiency, and more. And to this day, 5 years later, it remains a game-changing piece of legislation. Thousands of megawatts of solar were constructed. New opportunities for rooftop solar were opened. The largest offshore wind project in the country is currently under construction off the coast of Virginia. Billions of dollars in clean energy investments were made, thousands of jobs were created. But here's the problem. PJM's failure to quickly connect these solar and battery projects to the electric grid through what Dustin was talking about, the interconnection queue, has had horrible consequences. These cheaper, cleaner, and faster to deploy solar energy and wind sources sit waiting to turn on because PJM has delayed the repairs to this process. We're 5 years into this. At the same time, and as I'll talk about shortly, PJM continues to state publicly that they believe natural gas generation should not only continue, but should skip the line. I want to talk a little bit about the rapid demand growth for energy we're experiencing in Virginia. Virginia has more data centers than anywhere, and the rapid growth of them and the somewhat speculative demand that they are causing is sending utilities scrambling, or put differently, salivating, over the potential to construct dirty, really expensive gas plants to meet that demand. Yet, if we had the thousands and thousands of megawatts of clean energy online that are delayed in the Virginia interconnection queue, would these utility companies be proposing fossil fuels? PJM's encouragement of the continued need for gas only drives these conversations forward at the same time as the connection queues delayed our clean energy transition. As recently as a few months ago, PJM officials spoke publicly in Virginia and told the Virginia Commission on Electric Utility Regulation, which is as exciting as it sounds, that without gas generation, there could be brownouts. This is not true, in the sense that the megawatts of power needed are ready and being constructed right now. Lastly, I want to talk about the level of risk that we're talking about here. Virginia has seen millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in investments in solar and battery storage and billions of dollars of investments in our offshore wind project. Yet with PJM's pro-gas tilt, the delayed interconnection could potentially hurt our chance of achieving our climate and clean energy goals that we laid out for in the Virginia Clean Economy Act. We could risk the evaporation of private investment in these cheaper, cleaner, and faster renewable energy sources. And three, the utilities could continue to hide behind PJM as they propose projects that are not exactly for their energy demand, but to pad their bottom line. So PJM needs to get full control of its interconnection queue and its pricing structures and figure out a way to work with utilities to make sure the people of Virginia are not left holding the bag on their electric bill for dirty, expensive, out-of-date fossil fuel projects that really only serve to drive bonuses to utility executives. Without these reforms, residents and businesses in Virginia are going to pay for transmission costs and generation costs needed to serve data centers, whether those data centers exist now or ever exist in the future because of the decisions that PJM is making today. So the risk really could not be higher. In closing, I just want to say Virginia really needs to stay its course on the investments in clean energy, in solar and wind and batteries. We are moving the ball forward on all of these issues. We need a reliable and transparent grid operator in order to do that, and that's why we're here tonight. Later in the presentation, you'll see an action alert on your screen, and taking that action alert for Virginia will take you to a page to send a message to our governor, Glenn Youngkin, to push PJM to act. Thank you, and I will pass it back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Connor. Next up, we have Pennsylvania, which, as you can see, is mostly covered by PJM. And we have Nate Regal, who's our clean energy advocate in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to hand it over to Nate.
All right, thank you. And we'll jump right in. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll just briefly touch on how these issues are affecting Pennsylvania and a little bit about how Pennsylvania, we'll say, might be a little bit unique regarding all these states, all the chapters, that we have on this call. And I'll start with that, actually, that Pennsylvania is an energy exporter, whereas a lot of the other states that you'll be hearing from on this call depend on importing energy to meet their demand. So we're in a unique position there. But even there, we'll get down here a little bit, but even with us being a net energy exporter, we still have projects in the queue that cannot make it out of the queue, and the vast majority of those are renewable energy projects. But we'll get a little bit more to some of those implications. But right now, all across the state, prices are increasing, and that's through every single energy distribution company that receives their electricity, through PJM. All of them are now seeing increases in rates that, your electricity bill is increasing. Another impact here is recently PJM fast-tracked some projects to try to, say, accommodate for the increase in demand and the backed up queue. So 7 of the 51 projects in Pennsylvania, 5 of them, 51 of the projects overall, 7 of them are in Pennsylvania. 5 are gas, 1 is nuclear, and 1 is wind. And what you see there, if you read between the lines, is we don't have any new solar and no battery energy storage. But if you look at the queue on PJM's own website, you can look at a map that shows the queue. There's a huge amount of proposed wind, solar, and battery storage in Pennsylvania that unfortunately still is not making it out of the queue. Now, the one good thing we have going for us in Pennsylvania is we have Governor Shapiro, who's not afraid to stand up for the residents of Pennsylvania, and hopefully and making an impact with the electricity bills. So as you already heard from Dustin, he did file suit, and that resulted in a cap on what the capacity auction could meet. So that resulted in the last auction reached the cap, but it was stopped at the cap. So even though it was extremely high, higher than historical, that cap did end up saving money. So that is, we'll say, the high level of Pennsylvania, and I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Nate. Next up, we have New Jersey, my home state. Angeli, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. Angeli Ramos, New Jersey Sierra Club Director. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And for those of you that might be confused in the chat, we will be answering questions at the end, and we will also be taking questions in the breakout rooms. Apologies for the confusion. We're just trying to get through all of the states here, which there are many. So diving into New Jersey, I want to start by saying that New Jersey is highly progressive in its vision for clean energy, the clean energy transition, and for emission reduction goals in our state. So unfortunately, with the theme of what you've been hearing tonight about the interconnection queue, PJM's inability to accurately plan for transmission, New Jersey is being highly impacted because our markets are truly moving in the direction of clean energy development. So that is essentially putting the state behind in our ability to achieve our own clean energy goals. Currently, in the law of New Jersey, we are supposed to achieve 50% of renewable energy, that is solar and wind, just solar and wind, by 2030. So 50% of the electricity that we consume needs to be coming from these renewable energy sources. And 100% clean energy, the definition is a bit more expansive, by 2035. And this is currently in executive order, but possibly moving into a law as well. So when we are not achieving our energy goals, that essentially develops into us not being able to meet our emission reduction goals, because as you can imagine, then that results in more reliance to fossil fuels, therefore more burning, therefore more emissions. So for New Jersey specifically, there are nearly 1,600 projects. Well, I should say for overall, there's nearly 1,600 projects currently stuck at the PJM interconnection queue. Of all of those, 79 come from little tiny New Jersey, and 96% of those 79 projects are unfortunately clean energy projects. So you can continue to see the trend here, state after state, the projects that we are being seeing stuck are clean energy projects. So New Jersey is unique in the sense that we are, unfortunately, a really expensive state when it comes to affordability of housing, schools, food, etc. So for us, these increases in electricity has actually taken a huge burden on low and medium income families. So PJM's capacity market, the last one that just hit everybody in our electric bills in June, is costing New Jersey ratepayers $800 million over the next year. That essentially means 17 to 20% increase in your electric bill, depending on your utility territory. Here in New Jersey, we have a couple of electric utilities. So a lot of people have looked into this, and without PJM reform, which we've clearly talked about through the different slides, and clearing the interconnection queue, it is estimated that in the next 10 to 15 years, New Jerseyans' power bills will increase by 60% of today's prices. That is clearly with all of the affordability issues that we experience in New Jersey, but also in the entirety of the PJM region, that is something that it's unacceptable and we cannot afford. Next slide, please. Thank you, Dan. So New Jersey, as it's very much reflected in our laws, in our rules, in our policies, we want to build clean energy. That is where our market is at. And it's because of many reasons, because of public health, because of reducing emissions, but also because it's the cheapest form of energy that we can actually build and the fastest. So by doing that, and again, a lot of people have looked into this, we can actually decrease the cost of our electric bill by 7% of what we currently pay right now. So avoiding that 60% increase over time, but actually going under what we currently pay right now. New Jersey, fortunately, has not seen the boom in data centers as other states, particularly Virginia, mainly because we have very expensive land. We're a small state, we're overdeveloped, and we're overpopulated. So finding the land to build these data centers is quite difficult. So we have not experienced this boom. However, as an energy importer state, total opposite of Pennsylvania, as you just heard from Nate, we're highly dependent on other states' energy generation so that we can suffice our energy demand. So elected officials in New Jersey and decision makers are feeling completely out of control over this situation of our generation and how much we ultimately pay for our electricity. And a lot of people are unhappy. A lot of people are experiencing affordability burdens. So all of this has led to clean energy being more partisan, um, very unfortunate, exacerbating the Republican rhetoric of anti-clean energy, right? And so New Jersey is going through a very particular time. We have a gubernatorial election this year, same as Virginia, it's just Virginia and New Jersey. And so all of this situation of PJM and utility bills going higher has made this situation and the narrative even more complicated. So New Jersey also is currently pressuring PJM for a seat at the table so that we feel like we have a little bit more control of what is happening, and has also threatened the RTO that we might leave, PJM overall. And additionally, I want to stress the fact that not only is PJM failing at its job, they also go state by state trying to lobby our elected officials and trying to convince them that clean energy policies, clean energy laws are actually at the root cause of all of this situation that we're experiencing. That is simply not true, as we all know this. But this has caused a lot of chaos in our highly clean energy progressive state, where now we're seeing a lot of infighting that is jeopardizing the ability of our clean rules, clean energy rules, and carbon emission reduction rules to really be implemented in the timeline that they need to be implemented. So with closing with this thought, we will also have an action alert at the end for New Jersey that will urge Governor Murphy and its agencies to continue to pressure PJM because to be honest, they are doing a good job on that. But also to hold strong and to sustain our emission reduction rules as they're meant to be, and to continue the clean energy transition. So with that, I'll pass it back to Dan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Angeli. Next up, we have Maryland, and I'm going to pass it over to our chair, Randy Lyon.
Thanks very much, Dan, and I'm gratified to see the large number of participants today, including lots from Maryland, so that's really great. So I'm the vice chair of the Maryland chapter and also the legislative chair, so I'm a volunteer, and I'm really happy to be here because PJM has been a really difficult hurdle for us in Maryland. Similar to what you've heard from New Jersey and some of the other states, Maryland has a very progressive set of climate goals. We're aiming for 100% clean electricity by 2035. We're aiming for a 60% reduction from a baseline level of carbon emissions by 2031. And we're aiming for net zero across all sources, not just electricity generation, by 2045. And so we're trying to make really good progress here in Maryland and be very responsible, but we've been critically hampered by PJM. In particular, you've heard tonight about the queue. So there was a queue that was where applicants to hook into the transmission grid were not receiving approval. And the queue got so long that PJM literally stopped accepting applications. They've now started to clean up the backlog. There still is a queue, but they've made progress, and they're aiming to get it eliminated within the next year or so. But it's been a real problem for us because that queue has meant that we've lost out the opportunity to get the Inflation Reduction Act tax subsidies for the solar and other renewable installations. To give you a sense of the size of the queue in Maryland, it's currently about 3 gigawatts worth of solar projects. Maryland's total capacity is electricity generation is about 12 gigawatts. So it's about if we could get those projects that are in the queue online, that would be like a 25% increase in what we've got in Maryland for all types of electricity. Now, in fairness, not everything in the queue is a realistic project, and that is a problem. So not all these projects have financing and would pencil out, and we recognize that. But there are still many good realistic projects there, and it's important that PJM prioritize those and work through its queue in a way that really gets us get it cleared out quickly so that those projects can get access to the tax subsidies and other benefits that are out there, and also so that we can get the cleaner air that much sooner. So one way that PJM has affected us is the delays caused by the queue, and then the other is through prices, and that PJM did not coordinate well when it recognized that we had some coal plants that were choosing to retire. And instead of coordinating with the state and doing systematic planning, those plants came offline, and then we had to pay in the capacity auction to get that peak load capacity back into the system. That's costing us lots of money. It's going to be raising prices, not just during peak times, but we pay for that capacity in our electric bills every month. So it's going to be raising our electric bills by several percent because of that bad planning. So let's see. Then the other thing that I want to stress, and this has come up in some of the other discussions too, and I've seen it in the chat also, PJM fulfills a quasi-governmental role. I think it's natural for people to look at it and say it should be serving the public interest. It's managing huge amounts of power that are going across an interstate system. But PJM is not set up to address the public interest. There's no direct public representation, systematically on the board. Now, yes, there are members that can run for election and get on there, but there's more than 1,000 members of PJM, and overwhelmingly they're in the power industry. Companies can have subsidiaries, and all of those subsidiaries get to vote. And So I think, one company alone could have 20 subsidiaries. Well, there's only 13 PJM states. So, one company can easily outvote, everybody, the entire state system. This is something that the governors, to their credit, have really come around to and recognize. And I'm actually happy to say that there has been some bipartisan recognition of this. There was a letter that was sent by, I believe, 8 PJM region governors, and it included both Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania and Governor Murphy and Governor Moore, but also included Governor Youngkin from Virginia. And in a recent conference on PJM issues, all of those governors spoke and frankly had a very similar kind of tone, that the governance system is really badly broken. And we also heard from independent experts that are saying exactly the same thing. So I think that's probably a good place to stop, and I'll be happy to talk more in the chat and hand it over to our next state.
Thank you, Randy. Next up, we have Kentucky, which, as you can see, is partially covered by PJM. So it is a little bit of a different situation. And I'm going to hand it off to Julia Finch, our chapter director in Kentucky.
Hey, Dan, thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. A great crowd. And also just this is one of the things that makes Sierra Club so great, is when we can learn from each other, we can learn about what's going on regionally and support one another in our work. So just to give you a little bit of what's going on in Kentucky with PJM, we're in a very different position from all of the other states that have spoken so far tonight. We're a little more in line with our colleagues from West Virginia, who will speak in a little bit. But the issues in Kentucky when it comes to PJM are kind of where the region is. Our PJM region is our eastern and Appalachian portion of the state. This is the state that falls within PJM territory. It's also where we have some of our rural co-ops. The landscape of our utilities and energy regulators is very complex. And so we're finding in our energy work across the state, whether it's getting people out for rate cases in front of the PSC, or some of that, kind of deeper engagement on, the kind of monopoly of fossil fuels that John had just mentioned in the chat there. We are really working on eliminating some of the barriers to accessibility for our residents to actually be able to engage in our processes. So in the PJM territory that you see here, and again, it's not the entirety of the state, but it is our eastern Appalachian coalfield region for the most part. We've got East Kentucky Power Co-op and Kentucky Power. So we've got a co-op and we've got an investor-owned utility. Across the state, we have investor-owned utilities. We've got a federally owned government agency with TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. We've got MISO and PJM as our RTOs, and just a variety. As I said, we have investor-owned utilities, rural electric co-ops, and also government agencies. So the energy landscape is very complex and makes it difficult for us to kind of weigh in on a singular message. But I think our message to PJM is the same message that we have across the state, which is that we are ready, willing, and able to engage in a transition away from coal, especially, right? Because that coal keeps the lights on. That's on all of our bumper stickers and all of our license plates here in Kentucky. So we are really battling against that that deep-pocketed lobbying of the Kentucky Coal Association and other folks who really want to keep fossil fuels online here as long as possible. And that kind of takes us to the third bullet point here. We've really been fighting in the legislature. We've had 3 years of coal protection bills that have been filed. One is Senate Bill 349, formed what's called the EPIC Commission. That's the Energy Planning and Inventory Commission. Their sole purpose is to slow the retirement of plants fueled by coal and gas. So they oversee now the PSC, where we can make our public comments and our public interaction. So they've added another layer of bureaucracy solely for the purpose of keeping fossil fuels online. We have numerous solar storage and even a possible wind project that are currently in line in the queue, the PJM queue that we keep hearing about. But that's not the only battle we fight here when it comes to even being able to talk about renewable options and clean energy options. The EPIC committee that I just spoke about, there's no position for renewable energy that's populated entirely with coal, gas, and more traditional energy options. So we fight to even have a voice and have a seat at the table. I think I have one more slide. So our work is I'm new to the PJM work. I am in awe of the work that my colleagues are doing, especially those where PJM covers the entire territory, and you see how they are holding up and slowing our progress, our movement to bring more renewables online. So a lot of our work right now is this investigation of how PJM policy decisions have impacted our rural service utilities. And we are seeing here in Kentucky, as everyone is seeing, in this region and beyond, more demand for these potential the potential of data centers, the potential of other large load demand coming up that will really for Kentuckians, certainly if we are beholden to coal and gas, will be extremely detrimental to the environment if we see this growth that is projected. So we're looking at PJM as a part of a much broader kind of complex energy picture in Kentucky, and look forward to hearing from more of you and answering any questions you might have after we wrap up. So I'll pass it on to the next.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's great to have the perspective of very different types of states here tonight. Next up, we have Ohio, and we're going to bring on Neil Wagoner from our Beyond Coal campaign.
Thanks, Dan. All right, so moving from northeast from Kentucky into the great state of Ohio. Now, Ohio, often known as the heart of it all, and in terms of PJM, that is very true as well. Ohio, one of the big things to recognize with our place in PJM is that we have the largest load in the RTO. What does that mean? We consume and demand more power than any other state. And at the same time as we're a state that demands more power than anywhere else in PJM, we also are a deregulated state, which means that our regulated utilities do not actually own the generation. They are going to PJM itself. They are going to the grid and they are buying the amount. They are saying how much power they need, and they're buying that power to make sure that there's enough power to keep the lights on for all of their customers. This means that we are, as a state, uniquely vulnerable to the price fluctuations of how much the price of electricity is on the grid and is being set in PJM, because we are totally dependent on the grid, and we have the most demand, we're deregulated, and we are a net importer of electricity as well. Additionally, one of the big issues in Ohio, while Virginia is far and away the leader in the country when it comes to how much data center demand is being created, Ohio is one of the top states as well, in the top 3 or 4 states in the country in terms of how much demand is currently being created from already built and under construction data centers, and how much demand is going to be created from new data centers that are being planned to be built, especially this huge cluster of data centers in central Ohio in AEP's region. And this is leading to significantly increased costs, significantly increased demand in the state. A state that has traditionally, over the past decade or so, really had flat demand is now looking like a hockey stick. So, with a state that has demanding more power, is a net importer, and is seeing the amount of power requested skyrocketing, you'd think, is this a state that is really treating this thoughtfully, smartly, progressively? Those of us who are in Ohio, well, we all know that the answer to that is. Let's go to the next slide. No, the answer is no. Over the past decade, what we've seen, past decade plus now, what we've seen in Ohio is the state legislature has worked to systematically dismantle and sunset state utility energy efficiency goals, as well as our renewable goals. This is big because it means that where we previously set goals of how much we can reduce our energy demand and use these programs to make it so we don't need as much power. We've gotten rid of those, and it's just off the races. Let's try to get as much power and consume as much power as possible. Similarly, we've gotten rid of these goals of trying to get more clean energy in the ground. This is a big issue because in Ohio, while we have not seen a significant interest in merchant companies, so independent companies that wanting to build new gas generation, we have seen a lot of interest from companies to build solar generation. Right now, we have somewhere north of around 4,000 megawatts of solar that's been built in the state in the past few years, and another 5,000 that's going to be built in the not too distant future. There's a ton of interest in solar and not an interest in building a lot of gas. That's a good thing. But what we've also seen from the state legislature is they've done everything possible to set up roadblocks to building additional solar. Over a decade ago, they put up major blocks to building wind, and we've also seen a lot of anti-clean energy efforts within rural communities where we're hoping to see more clean energy get built as well. So this is really slowing down as we are increasing how much power we need, and we are so reliant on PJM. We're making it a lot harder to build clean energy in our state, which is a real problem. Similarly, we've had the state, instead of being thoughtful about how do we tackle this, how do we move forward with this, how do we reduce our energy demand, we've instead seen more conversations around, well, maybe we could leave PJM. Maybe the state could move over to MISO. This is something from the Ohio Speaker of the House, very powerful position in Ohio. We've also seen legislators over the past number of years talk about, man, maybe we should re-regulate, which would mean utilities owning generation again. That would be super, super expensive for the state and super expensive for customers. So we're really not seeing the state, even though we play in a really important part and are particularly impacted by PJM, we're not seeing the state of Ohio take a really progressive or forward-looking approach to how do we deal with these issues. You'll notice in that letter that we shared at the beginning, all those state governors that signed on, who's missing there? Governor DeWine, state of Ohio. So this is a big problem. And we do not see and we continue to see real issues with how Ohio is playing in PJM and the seriousness to which our leaders are taking the issues with PJM. So that's it for Ohio. I'd like to move next door, go to the next slide, and talk about our friends to the west, the state of Indiana. Now,
Neil, can I interrupt you for a second?
Go ahead, Dan.
I'm so sorry. You mentioned that Ohio was, floating the idea of entering MISO. Can you explain for folks just what MISO is? A quick acronym check.
Sure. MISO is the RTO. So it's the grid operator that operates in kind of the central part of the country. So we've heard this mentioned several times with India. We'll talk about Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. We'll talk about this as well. But it's one of the other major RTOs within the U.S.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about the state of Indiana. Let's go to the next slide. So where Ohio plays a major role in PJM and having the largest demand, roughly 20%, Indiana has a much smaller footprint within PJM. Roughly, this is the part of Indiana that is in PJM is for the utility service territory for a utility called I&M, Indiana Michigan Power. This is an affiliate of AEP, a major one of the major utilities in the country. So it's a much smaller footprint in Indiana. MISO has a much bigger footprint, and the issues around MISO tend to impact the state a little bit more. But the issues that we're seeing in PJM in Indiana are very similar to what we're seeing elsewhere. Notably, we are seeing a lot of increased demand around data centers that's being projected and currently being planned for in Indiana. I&M is planning significant build out of gas now, are looking at a significant build out of gas to meet some of this data center demand that's being speculated on. Additionally, in Indiana, we have the governor's office has really leaned into a similar pro-coal executive order agenda that we've seen coming out of DC and the Trump administration as well, which means that they're trying to open, we've seen the state really trying to open the door to data centers while also pushing back on the coal plants that were planning to be retired. So in Indiana, this is really just to close out here, we're seeing a lot of the same things that are impacting everywhere around PJM, which is increased costs, and a lot of this is being driven by speculation around data centers. And our team in Indiana is looking at right now, how do we push back on this while also continuing to build momentum for renewable energy in the state? And I'll pass it on to my colleagues now.
Thank you, Neil. Next up, we have Jim Coatzen, who is our chapter chair for West Virginia, and I believe is our second to last state tonight. Jim, take it away.
Thank you. So West Virginia is entirely within the PJM region. Our major utilities are American Electric Power and First Energy. We are facing some real issues with a couple of large transmission lines. There is definitely a bottleneck in transmission between the Ohio Valley and the East Coast load demands. A key problem that we have is that while there's a huge backlog of solar projects seeking those interconnection agreements, our coal-fired power plants tend to be underutilized, and our utilities seem to be supporting that transmission in an effort to sell more coal-fired electricity. State legislators continue to push for those, and the PJM policies that give preference to those fossil fuels mean that the interconnections for a lot of our renewable projects are still on the back burner. Next slide. So a big problem that we see is a dramatic increase in new data centers. Most of the ones we're seeing plan to produce their own generation, mostly very large gas-fired power plants. While there's been some legislation to provide some ratepayer protection against those, the legislation also preempts local zoning and siting regulations that would give communities some control over what's happening. Another key problem is that our governor has just recently announced his 50 by 50 plan. Currently, there are about 15 or 16 gigawatts of generation in West Virginia. These new data centers propose to add another 7 gigawatts of gas-fired generation. The governor wants to triple our generation to 50 gigawatts by 2050, focusing on coal, gas, and nuclear power, primarily as a wholly owned tool of the large fossil fuel reserves that are being held in West Virginia. These are large companies that have bought up those reserves. Unless they can continue to burn the coal and the gas, they've lost their money. So they're really pushing for this, and our governor seems to be backing them very much. Next slide. So to summarize, West Virginia's got some major problems, similar to what we see in Ohio and Kentucky. And we are hoping that some help in reforming PJM will shift the economics that are driving continued use of these coal and gas-fired power plants. That'll suffice for tonight. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much, Jim. And with that, we have our final state, Illinois, partially covered by PJM. And we have Christine Nanicelli here to tell us about the issues there.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone, for joining on a weekday night, talking about PJM. Wonky stuff, but important stuff. All right, so we'll keep it short and sweet because there's a lot of similar themes here throughout all of the different states. We've got PJM in the north for the ComEd territory of Illinois, and thank you to my Illinois folks. I see some of you that have joined the call. But PJM has been a thorn in our side for over a decade, longer than just since we've seen price spikes really hit utility customers over the last few months, which we'll talk about in a second. But PJM has definitely been a major challenge in a lot of the important work that we have taken up with our governor, with the state legislature over the past few years to advance clean energy goals, decarbonization goals. On the one hand, we've set many of these critical clean energy goals, moving towards 100% by 2050. We've had some challenges with our renewable portfolio standard with local siting, but far and away, one of the biggest challenges we've faced in bringing clean energy online at the pace we need to keep up with our decarbonization work is the PJM interconnection queue. I think the last time I checked the queue, I believe the ComEd territory alone of PJM had 70 gigawatts of wind, solar, and storage. So that's 60,000 megawatts. And just as like a point of reference, the Waukegan coal plant on the northern shores of Lake Michigan is just over 700 megawatts. So that's a pretty extraordinary amount of clean energy that is waiting in the queue to come online. So that's absolutely a huge challenge. Next and last slide. So I think one little like short snippet I'll mention to you guys. You know, I come from the Beyond Coal campaign and working actually on that Waukegan coal plant over a decade ago. I might start to age myself here, but this was a really inefficient old plant built in the 1920s. Absolutely filthy. But it didn't run very often. And we knew the economics of it were pretty bad. And so we did some a deeper dive analysis on what was happening here financially with the plant. And lo and behold, came to discover, I think this was around maybe 2012, that the PJM capacity market, instead of helping to incentivize new generation, was actually just helping to prop up aging, inefficient fossil fuel plants and frankly nuclear plants in our territory, and really delaying the critical progress that we needed to make on coal plant retirements. So this has been a long-standing challenge for our work in Illinois. Fortunately, we've been able to make a lot of progress. We have set statewide decarbonization targets. That plant has since been retired. But in order to make the next steps of our progress in decarbonization, we need a whole lot more clean energy to come online in that interconnection queue. Those transmission limitations are a major challenge for us to do so. And, you know, I think I'll just make, you know, one other point. Data centers as well is a huge challenge. We're seeing unprecedented load growth in our area across the region. And so this supply and demand crunch is creating unique challenges in the PJM energy markets, and our ratepayers are feeling it acutely. In June, we saw ratepayers in ComEd territory, their utility bills jump 50%. This has happened as well in central and southern Illinois for the MISO territory as well. So this is a significant affordability crisis. It's a significant climate and clean energy crisis. And so we're working, and we'll talk more about this in the Illinois breakout. There's a lot of work that we can do and action we can take at the state level to address this, but we also need critical regional and federal reforms on this. Back to you, Dan.
Well, I'm in big trouble because I somehow almost forgot Delaware. And as Dustin likes to tell me, they're small but mighty, so we won't forget about them. Dustin, take it away before I get in trouble with you further.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll keep it quick so we can get to the breakout rooms and dive into some of these issues. So big issues in PJM, although our demand has remained largely flat in Delaware, we do have one of the nation's largest data centers trying to be built currently in Delaware. But thus far, our demand has remained flat, but our prices are really starting to surge a lot because of the capacity auction and not being able to get more power online. You've heard a number of states talking about being a net importer of energy. That's true in Delaware as well. And that's, I want to stress it, like, that's okay. It's okay that some states are exporters and some states are importers. That's why we're in a regional system to help mitigate that. And it actually helps with reliability overall. And I know that doesn't make sense, but it does. Again, watch the 101 and you can learn more about that. But Delaware is having a lot of issues around siting. So you have the connection queue problem, then you have siting issues in Delaware. So you had 140 gigawatts of power in the queue when it was fully backlogged and shut down. Only one project actually was in Delaware. So we have a high need for transparent data sharing and planning at the regional level and with PJM, so we can get more projects online in Delaware. We can meet our clean energy and climate goals and really start reducing those transmission related costs that are really driving up energy prices in Delaware. Go to the next slide. Mentioned earlier, one of the coal plants, our last coal plant in Delaware, actually had to stay online for a couple years because of that poor long-term transmission planning, and that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to Delaware ratepayers. And so we're working on a number of things, and we're going to get into breakout rooms and talking about more solutions and things that each state's doing. So looking forward to that. I'm going to end there so that way we can get into the details. Oh, I'm not going to end there. So wrapping us up here. So the common themes, right, that we've heard from state to state to state, we have threats against the state and regional clean energy goals. A lot of states in the PJM region are part of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is really being challenged by not bringing on new clean power sources. State goals, as you've heard, across the board are under threat of this. We have a lack of internal infrastructure at PJM to handle the speculative data center boom, and that's causing a lot of strain through bad load growth planning scenarios on local electrical systems and the capacity market that PJM runs. We're seeing issues around transmission planning and collaboration with states, roadblocks for interconnecting new projects, and of course, all of that is leading to electric rates that are really hitting ratepayers very hard at a time when inflation and other costs are also seeing large increases, which makes it even more untenable. So we all have sort of unique issues across each states, but we're united in the fact that at the core of them all is sort of a mismanagement, a long-running mismanagement at the PJM level that states have to come together and work on, both separately but also collaboratively. And I'll pass it back to Dan.
So that was fantastic, Dustin, and all of our speakers. Thank you so much for giving us the behind-the-scenes story in each of your states. Now we're going to have an opportunity for some actions. In some states, we have action alerts, and I'm going to flash the QR codes on the screen. So if you are from one of these states, please go ahead and take the action. In Pennsylvania, we have 2 different action alerts on PJM. This will be a chance to reach out to your elected leaders in your state, showing your concern for these issues. So we're going to start with these 2. I'll give it a few seconds. And before we move on to the next slide, I didn't want to fit them all in one slide and jam them together. So we'll go through state by state. And to do the QR code, if you aren't experienced with this, you open your phone camera and scan the code. And it'll pop up with a little link. Click on that link and it'll take you right there. We will also send out these links along with the recording if you're having any issues accessing them. Next, we have West Virginia, Delaware, and New Jersey. And then here we have some contact information for our presenters, various contacts in our states. We encourage you to reach out and get more involved. No particular action alert at this time. If there, in some of these states, there are other pressing actions at the moment that are not PJM focused, but we do want to hook you in and get you involved for future actions. And now finally, we have our chance to meet others from your state, interact, have a little more of a conversation. We know we've been sharing a lot of information at you for this first hour plus, and now is a chance to interact with others from your state, ask questions of your moderator. I do want to note that we have breakout rooms for most of the states. If we don't have a moderator for your state, then you'll stay in the main room with us, and we have Jesse, who's one of our RTO specialists, to help moderate that conversation for the other remaining states. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms in just a second. You'll see your state name. You can hover over it and then hit the join button. Let's see. Stop sharing. So you should have an invite to your breakout rooms now.
No, there is no invite.
Yeah, so down in the bottom, there should be a button